Welcome to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
Welcome back to the High Rise, a laid-back, data-back conversation where we talk all things cannabis, from US MSOs to Canadian LPs, products and market analysis through the lens of data. My name is Cy Scott with Headset, and I am joined, as always, by Emily Paxia of Poseidon.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the High Rise.
So good to see you again, Emily, and you are just back from Miami.
Yeah, just fresh off a 6 a.m. flight out of Miami, connecting through Houston this morning. Fun fact, if you're in the international terminal of Miami early in the morning, there's no coffee. And even more fun fact, the Starbucks at the Houston airport is notoriously slow. I learned about this from a pilot today. It took me over 40 minutes to get my coffee. Last person on the plane. Almost missed my connection. But I, unlike cannabis, which I'm not physically addicted to, am extraordinarily addicted to caffeine. So 4-hour flight where I have to work in a middle seat was not going to be okay without coffee. So made it. I'm here in one piece. I think I washed all the COVID off. So I'm feeling squeaky clean, ready to do the pod. How are you?
I'm good. It's nice to know that a pilot was there giving you tips on how long the Starbucks takes, and hopefully slowing up his flight or her flight as well, right? Just
he seemed he seemed much chiller than I did. I was very stressed, but I mean, whatever. I was okay. I was just bummed because it seemed all so inefficient, but this is a great resignation at work, I guess.
That's right. I think we should start a travel tips podcast after the High Rise.
We should. We do it a lot.
We do.
But why I was in Miami was a cool reason. I was there for my very first F1 Formula One Grand Prix race. Asai, you are much more versed in this than I am, but one of our portfolio companies who does a lot of business with a lot of different types of companies who are cannabis and otherwise had a bunch of tickets. And so they were doing this as a client appreciation thing. And I helped to introduce them to some new prospective clients who they were able to invite, which it was a remarkably fun event and met a lot of interesting people. And I think they had a good event with the companies that they had wanted to talk to. So it was great all around. But I will say my driver that I picked after watching the practice sessions did not win, but that's okay. He was on the podium.
Yeah, I'm super jealous that you were there, and it was really cool to see. It looked like a good time. Looked very much like the who's who of the world was at this race. It seems like, it's so like Formula One's notorious and synonymous with places like Monaco, but not every race is like Monaco, right? Where it's just, a lot of famous, successful, wealthy people. But in Miami, it seemed like it did attract like a lot of that audience. But it was a good race though.
It was a great race. I met a very famous driver I found out on Thursday night. His name is David
Coulthard. Yeah.
Coulthard. DC.
Crazy. Yeah. You sent me that. I'm like, holy shit, what? Like, I just randomly bumped into him. I mean, yeah, very, not only a famous driver, but now he does a lot of commentating, a lot of interview stuff. So he's just like a big part of like the media side now of Formula One.
Yeah, he's a well-championed racer. I think 13 or 8 Grand Prix? I don't know. He did a lot, and he now lives in Monaco. And I actually chatted with him for quite a while, so I learned a lot. We should debrief on that. But you're right, and he is with the Red Bull team. And so he's still a Red Bull ambassador. So we were talking before the show about the different sponsorships of the event and whether or not we feel like cannabis may ever be there. Because I can tell you from being at the event, the big sponsors were Heineken and Herradura Tequila, which, as we all know, our listeners know, I'm a fan of tequila. So definitely spent a little time in that activation tent, which was really fun. It was also, I think, 95 degrees. It was like the hottest days it's been in Miami. I got a lot of sun, but it was, we were very sweaty, but it was a race to stay hydrated. And I was saying to you that I was surprised that the McLaren team is sponsored by a e-cigarette company called Vuse, which we all know the story of Juul because Juul got the most press, but I've been tracking the data around this, and Vuse is actually linked to more teen vaping than Juul is now. And so I thought it was an interesting fact that such a kind of high class team as McLaren would be sponsored by a company that's kind of becoming controversial here, especially in the US.
Yeah, especially so F1 for the longest time was run by this guy, Bernie Ecclestone, and is this old guy and infamous for many reasons, I guess, but wasn't really big into building the brand with like a younger audience. Was really into just like old people with money is what he used to talk about, and a lot of side deals on, you know, where races take place. It's kind of like the FIFA stuff, right? Like a little shady. And F1 sold to Liberty Media, and they've done a really good job of like attracting a new audience, and, you know, particularly in the US, right? It's getting really popular here. And with that audience comes, you know, younger viewers. So I am surprised that that stuff's still okay. I know for a long time, you know, racing and tobacco went hand in hand. All those Marlboro F1 liveries for the longest time in like the 80s, maybe 90s. Yep. That's all long gone. They did all sorts of kind of tricky stuff, like British American Tobacco turned into British American Racing. You know, more recently, like Philip Morris got rid of the Marlboro sponsorship, moved to like Mission Winnow, which was just some kind of fake company that just had this all these like platitudes about, you know, what they were doing, but it really wasn't much, but it was all over the Ferrari cars. And that's all long gone. And alcohol is like kind of on the way out, I feel like, too. You know, there used to be like martini racing and stuff, like specifically from like the cars. You know, I think the activation stuff at events, I mean, obviously you can buy alcohol at a race, and there'll be tents and stuff like that. So I'm surprised, yeah, that vape's there. Maybe it's next on the list. You know, there's been talk about, it's like the WHO and like what they're going after is like sugary drinks next, and like energy drinks. I know have had bans, and you have a whole team named after an energy drink. Exactly, Red Bull. So kind of interesting. The alcohol stuff, like Heineken does that 0.0, their alcohol free stuff. So maybe like for our space, we'll see like CBD or something might be the first thing that they have before you see any real like THC based ads. But who knows? There's a long storied history, I think, with F1 on similar categories: tobacco, alcohol, and maybe someday cannabis.
I do like that martini racing stuff, though. I think it's pretty classic.
Oh, super classic.
Super classic. And I don't know, we're going to have to get a lot bigger as an industry when you think about I mean, Rolex was there.
Oh, yeah. It'll be a long time. It'll be maybe a tiny little logo on the side of a car.
Yeah. Once we Poseidon, let's not forget, was on the side of a car.
In F1?
Remember? No, not F1. Someday. Someday, not on a day like today. Someday that will happen. Although everyone's in the Hurt. It's May 9th, Monday, May 9th. Everyone's in the Hurt Locker with us today. So not just cannabis for once. It's pretty rough across the board.
Yeah, that is for sure. And we'll talk about that. But welcome back. Glad you got to go to a race. I hope to get to one this season, but nothing booked yet. But I know Austin's pretty easy to get to, maybe Canada and Montreal, but we'll see.
I think Montreal sounds really cool. Austin sounds really cool. And then the one that's going to be the next like showstopper, pop off the top. Maybe not the best racing, as you pointed out. This maybe wasn't the best racing from a track perspective, many people pointed that out to me. I was like, whatever, I had fun. The Vegas one.
Oh yeah, Vegas will be wild.
It's going to be on the road. It's going to be nuts.
Yeah, at night too on the Strip. So yeah, that should be interesting. If you get a hotel room overlooking the Strip, that'd probably be the way to go. But yeah,
that's the word. Yeah,
we'll have to podcast live instead of poolside, maybe like trackside podcast one day. Can't hear anything, just the cars.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're here in May, as you mentioned, and we were talking a bit about 420 and kind of looking at some numbers there. So I thought I'd do a quick check-in on that. You know, there's all the obvious stuff, and I'm sure everyone that listens to this has seen, you know, numbers are up, and, you know, like we've done tons of reports on 420 where, you know, it's 100% increases in sales and so on. You can download all that stuff from Headset on our website. But this year we did kind of a unique analysis. We looked at, you know, people going into stores versus delivery. And, you know, the pandemic narrative for the longest time has been around delivery. This like the pandemic is accelerating everything that was going to take 10 years into 2 years, right? Like everyone's going to just be shopping online. No one's going to go into stores. And that very much was the case. But what's quite interesting is that Since the pandemic's kind of eased and stuff has opened up, in-store sales are now kind of growing again, right? And delivery is not having as much of an impact that it did before. And we saw that same thing happen with 420 data. So the median store saw 180% growth to in-store sales, but only 122% growth to delivery sales. So it sounds like a lot of people wanted to go into stores on 420 and not necessarily open up a web page or an app to do the delivery. Maybe people wanted to just kind of see what's going on or browse the specials or just kind of be part of something versus just, opening their phone and seeing what's new.
Yeah, we have been talking a bit about how cannabis can be an experiential product category, just kind of like how wine is, where you go, you do the tastings, all these things, you learn about new products. And I feel like this is a good example of that. People wanted to go see what was going on. There were probably, as we were just talking about at another event, at this event, there were product activations. I know some brands had things going on the day of, and different retailers that I know. And I think to me, that's a really encouraging fact about the retail experience in cannabis, that people are still very engaged and interested in the category. And it does make me think more that we're on the right track and thinking that there will be kind of this bifurcation of replenishment through delivery. So you can have more time scheduled deliveries on things that you really like and use. You have a schedule where you run out of them. And then there's like, oh, I want to go see what else is new in the beverage category, which we know was an interesting category on 420, or in the edible space, or whatever it might be. And I think this is, to me, a very encouraging sign about the retail interest in our sector.
Absolutely. And that's interesting you mentioned beverage. One thing I wanted to talk to you about was this Houseplant video. So Houseplant is Seth Rogen's cannabis brand. Well, cannabis and home goods brand, I guess you'd classify them as. They do a lot of accessories. And there was a video that got published last week from Architectural Digest, which on their YouTube channel, and we'll link to it in the show notes here. I don't know if it's their headquarters. It's like a house that they have for Houseplant. I think they have a regular office space too. He mentions like it's quite boring. It's just an office space, but this is like a house where they can put their home goods in, right? And just kind of live what they're producing. And it's like a bungalow in LA, as you can imagine. He does the tour for Architectural Digest, which they do this all the time with actors, right? Come see, their lofts in New York or wherever it is. But I thought it was pretty good. But one thing that I thought was interesting, well, a couple of things. One, I didn't see any weed anywhere. Like there was no cannabis in the whole house. And I wonder if that was like an Architectural Digest thing because, brands like Houseplant, I think are really good at destigmatizing the industry because you got an actor, Seth Rogen, who's very, outspoken, very successful, talks about, his consumption habits and how he's like truly passionate about the category. He does all this cool home goods stuff, this kind of vintage vibe. But then, they're also very into their cannabis, right? Like the quality is of a level that, Seth Rogen can get behind, which probably says a lot given that he's such a consumer, yet didn't really see it, didn't really highlight it. And I know it's Architectural Digest and they're more interested in the house, but he was talking a lot about like the accessories that they have and just kind of disappointing. And I wonder if that was like a thing where they said, we don't want to have this stuff around, because I can't imagine Houseplant wouldn't, have that stuff everywhere. I mean, it's in LA, it's legal, it's their products. Like it had to be Architecture Digest, right? Or just a complete oversight.
I mean, it's a great question. And I'm actually, to your exact point, shocked because I feel like Seth Rogen is actually one of the, there's a lot of celebrity brands, celebrity associated brands. I've been underwhelmed by many of them because it feels a bit like, oh, I have a weed brand. But Seth Rogen actually lives as a known enthusiast of the category. He consumes it. He's been on camera consuming it. He has it around. And I feel like for this to happen is a departure from it. So it's a little disappointing because it is not on brand to be that way, to hold it separate. It's so weird too, because cannabis is so cool looking and so pretty. I mean, I don't know. It's a plant.
Yeah. Totally. It's a plant.
So,
but they did mention beverages, and that's what got me thinking about it when you talked about beverages there. That they are introducing a beverage product. I'm assuming the California market, which is where they're at, and Houseplant got its start in Canada actually under Canopy Growth. Mm-hmm. Yeah, with a deal there, and they did Houseplant beverages. I'm fairly certain, but Canada is just such a different market from how you can market stuff and. I don't think they had a lot of the same controls. I think here they're really, very involved is what it looks like. But looking at some beverage data in California, like what are they going into? What's the opportunity here? And looking at just the first quarter of this year's sales versus first quarter last year is about 14% growth in total sales. So this year, $15.6 million in beverage sales to 13.7 in first quarter of last year. So that's good. And I was wondering where, a lot of that growth is coming from. And it looks like a lot more people are producing beverages now. So about a third of increase in brands going from 63 to 83. And that's April 21 versus April 22. So you're seeing more brands producing beverages. Of those brands, the top 10 are taking up over 70% of sales. And we've talked about many of these brands like Lagunitas and Can and Manzanita, Wonder, that are on this list. So that's kind of what they're going into. We'll see how they do. But it seems like with home goods, I can imagine maybe they can put that in their fridge, and maybe Architectural Digest won't mind, as he tours the house and opens the fridge and there's beverages. But we'll see. I encourage you to, it's a good, interesting video and kind of a cool idea, right? To make it this experience.
Totally. I think it's perfect. And I think, minus the fact that there was no cannabis in the house. But yeah, the cannabis category in California is getting extremely competitive. It's difficult because the supply chain is pretty limited and everyone's kind of using a lot of the same resources. So there's not a lot of pricing support for them to try to improve their margins. And it was called what was it called? The Cola Wars, the Pepsi Coke Wars for decades. They're still fighting it out. Beverage is competitive you could see it in the craft beer category. Every beverage category. I used to do consulting for PepsiCo and Tropicana, and just thinking about these shelf spaces, packaging, what's driving consumer trends. Like at the time, I remember there was a consumer trend where everyone was like, sugar, we're doing Atkins diet. Orange juice is bad. I was like, guys, it's not the orange juice. That's put down the cookies, but it's all good. But I think this is now we're going to see in cannabis, and that you can see a lot of beverage folks getting into it, but it's a highly competitive space. But competition can breed the best things for consumers, because as the companies compete for the consumer's interest, then we're going to get better pricing, we're going to get better products. I think in the end it'll be good, but I think it's going to be difficult for a while. So Houseplant, I think, is better funded than many, so they'll probably do really well. I've been obsessed with their aesthetic, albeit I can't really afford it myself all the time. Some of the home good products are beautiful, but very pricey. So, I just think it's very interesting. Beverage is going to be, and considering that growth in California, that's actually really good. Over quarter, right?
It is really good. Yeah, that is really good. It's still a small category, but
Yes.
It might take someone like Houseplant to expand it. I think Can's done a great job and, grown the pie, right? So it's a small slice of the pie, but the pie keeps getting bigger. And so, yeah, maybe Houseplant can do some damage there. So, we'll see. They don't mention a timeline, but they just kind of alluded that they're working on it. So would be interesting. Maybe we can get Seth Rogen or some of his team on here. It'd be good to talk to him about this stuff.
Okay. Yeah, we should do that. We should see who we can get. If we could get, let's get Seth Rogen.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
Cool.
It'd be great. I think it'd be awesome.
I agree.
So yeah, speaking of competitive markets, some new market information. So some data coming out of New Mexico. Their cannabis control division, the CCD, sounds pretty intense, but it's like, it's like their liquor board. Reported that they sold $22.1 million worth of cannabis in annual sales, in April sales. It's April. And of that, Albuquerque had the most sales, totaling just over $8 million in recreational cannabis. But, so that's great. And the number is good. And, first month sales, good. Obviously, it's 420. The CCD has talked about, a target of 300 million in sales. I think they're a bit off the mark, but they do say that this will be offset by new stores opening up. I think they had over 100 stores open the first month, which is a big number. The medical stores were able to switch over, which gave them a great head start. But, I think that they have plenty of room yet to grow into. What's so interesting, I thought, is that the CCD called out specifically sales in communities near the Texas border that did really well. In particular, 2 locations, Hobbs and Sunland Park, New Mexico, each sold more than $1 million worth of recreational cannabis, earning those cities a spot in the top 5 New Mexico cities in terms of sales. So I looked up Hobbs, and Hobbs is a population of 40,000 people, according to the last census. That would be about $25 a person in sales, which is not 100% of the Hobbs, community is out there buying cannabis. So obviously, a lot of that revenue is coming from Texas. And then I looked at Sunland Park. Sunland Park is a city of 17,000 people. I mean, that's a pretty small town, and it broke $1 million in sales. And I looked where Sunland Park is. It's right next to El Paso, and El Paso, Texas, has got close to 700,000 people. Not a surprise. Like, no one's surprised. And I think what's interesting is that the CCD actually called that out. Like, hey, and by the way, these markets are doing really well. So people are driving in from Texas and buying lots of cannabis, and that will continue. Which reminded me of, I think it was Snoop Dogg and Willie Nelson. I'm not sure where Willie Nelson was back 10 years ago, but his tour bus got pulled over in West Texas. I know Snoop Dogg got pulled over in West Texas, and the county that he got pulled over in is right next to El Paso, just east of El Paso. For those that are in El Paso area going over to New Mexico, I'd be like pretty cautious, pretty wary of just, shuttling back and forth there, because Texas isn't the most friendly when it comes to this stuff, but obviously Texans want legal cannabis. And so kind of interesting and great to see some of those numbers. And, New Mexico continue to grow. At Headset, we have it projected to be close to 600 million by 2025. So, that's some ways to go, but we do a lot of work to get to these projections. When we look at like per capita spend, population, number of doors that this a market like this can support. And I'm not even sure, and I seriously doubt that we included like Texas sales in that, but maybe we did, because our team's pretty good with that stuff. But I doubt it, because we did it for 50 states. So I don't know if they went that granular to look at like border states and how much might come across, because it was like an exercise of like, what if states are legal in 2025? What would the markets look like? So it may be even more than that. So anyways, that's good news coming out of New Mexico. And then, speaking of new markets, New Jersey. So New Jersey, when we were out in Miami for Benzinga on 421 there, New Jersey sales started. We had a lot of opportunity to talk to people like Abner Curtin of Ascend Wellness, who have a footprint in New Jersey. And their first day sales there, New Jersey is reporting $1.9 million in first day sales, which is pretty significant for 12 stores. I think 12 locations were open. Mm-hmm. And that's where you look at, New Mexico, well over 100 stores, because they're able to convert the medical. New Jersey, with a much larger population, had 12 stores. And, I think if you track and look at the populations and stuff, I think 1.9 probably underrepresents like what New Jersey's capable of in significant ways. It's just because the stores aren't open.
Yeah, no, totally. And what is encouraging, and I can't speak specifics on it, is that they're seeing strong sales on the following weeks. So it's really, what's important is it's not just a, let's go see the spectacle. It's like, oh no, let's go shop for cannabis. So that's, I think, a good thing. And, we know that there were people who may have been discouraged by the line. So it's good to see people coming back and getting in the door.
Yeah, and I saw Leafly was reporting that that locations still have stock, and cannabis is still available, which was the big thing with New Jersey, and like why the state was like slowly rolling it out, was they were really concerned about the medical access, and it sounds like there's plenty of supply, as the organizations there have been telling New Jersey for some time. So it's great to see that is the case. It also reported that customers were a little upset that a lot of formats aren't available, things like edibles that are so common in other areas, including in New York, where you can, buy cannabis at these completely illegal locations that are gifting cannabis, per a loophole, maybe not completely illegal because they have some standing, they believe, but you can go to many of these locations. Also, Leafly's reporting on, they did a great article about going to a couple spots. One of them has like an online menu. It's crazy. It's just crazy. And you can, become a member for $150 a month, and you get $150 worth of gifts that month, including edibles. And so the New York has said, you need to stop this practice. I think last month they sent, or maybe it was February, they sent a letter out to everybody saying if you keep doing this stuff, you're not going to be grandfathered into the adult use markets. But something tells me that they really don't give a shit, and they're just going to continue to sell this way.
No, not only do they not give a shit, but they have lawyers representing them against the state on it. So I find it frustrating, and I'm curious to see how this nets out, but we'll see what happens next. But yeah, I do agree with you that the form factors in New Jersey are limited, although I think we did talk about the fact that they've repositioned. They have a couple edibles categories like lozenges and chewable gummies or chewables or something, which are like essentially gummies and hard candies, but they're positioned in a more medicinal tone. But yeah, I mean, certainly not the way we have them in the other markets. And like you said, competing against the illicit market, I don't know when the lawmakers will ever learn that that's the most sophisticated and aggressive competition, especially because they're not paying taxes, they're not paying licensing fees, and God knows how they're, doing their businesses. So it's a very competitive competitor.
Yeah. And in this article on Leafly, talking about these New York locations, a lot of it's California. And they're saying how they want it California. They want to emulate California. They even had a product that had the California warning label, the common little red label or whatever. God. And it got rid of the CA and they replaced it with NY. So some, ambitious designers are even copying that to look like California legal cannabis. So it is sophisticated, and it's something that we're up against here. So yeah, they've got to get in front of it. It's not fair to the operators that are doing it all above board. Well, speaking of New Jersey, a MSO that has exposure there is GTI, and GTI kicked off what you've called our never-ending earnings calls that have started. I feel like we just, is that why? We just came off of, Q4 and we're right in it again. Yeah, so, this one, I noticed Matt McGinley, who we've had, friend of the show from Needham, in his report talked about price compression and inflation as the main story here. GTI revenues were relatively flat. Is that correct? But I think Correct. They beat expectations.
They did. They beat by a bit, but still. It's been a tough time. It's been a tough quarter. We keep saying it's going to be like Q1, get the earnings out, don't look back, we move on. It was a tough time for the industry in terms of like plateauing growth, a bit of margin compression, and then we're going to see some expansion here with New Jersey opening and other things coming online. So
yeah, the margin compression is a good call out, right? Because I think that's what the inflation and price compression, definitely those two factors are certainly going to impact your margins.
They are. Yeah. And I mean, the wage aspect of the industry, we do have a lot of people that have to work in this industry. And so we're definitely feeling that as a sector, and we're going to feel it. And by the way, we're not alone, but it's right here in our backyard, and we will be feeling it. But I think that, even, and Matt even said it, he considers them the kind of the most consistent operator in the industry. At the end of the call, there was, they do a Q&A, and a thing to note is that many operators control who is allowed to ask questions. GTI leaves it pretty open. And so a lot of times the only people asking calls are these analysts at these investment banks who are quote unquote professionals. In this instance, there were a couple of investors that jumped on. And the first one is the very famous Leon Cooperman, who has in the past been one of the cheerleaders of the stock, has been in support of it. This time there was a bit of, he got on and he expressed some dissatisfaction with some of the selling activity. And it has subsequently been clarified by the company about the sell to cover. And we don't want to get into the details on that, but it is fairly common in these companies to see that. But I would say check it out, dig in a little bit if you want to learn more. The one thing I noticed is that the market has been going down. Look, and by the way, cannabis is not alone. Shopify is down. This morning I looked, they've been down 75% year to date. And we're not alone. We know Robinhood, we know a lot of these companies, and you can also look at Kathy Woods' ETF ARC and even Bitcoin now. I mean, we're not alone being in the hurt locker in the cannabis industry. But what happens when we see these big market drawdowns and they go on for a long time? Ours has been going on since February 2021. People get frustrated and they feel injured by the experience they're having invested in these companies. And so what may have appeared to be kind of like normalized activity in a company at other times now feels potentially targeted or spiteful or like it's harming the shareholders. But I think that a lot of these things are kind of ordinary course of business. And so I feel like probably Leon Cooperman is also in the pain on this. I mean, nobody likes to lose money, especially guys who are really good at making money. And so you'd be surprised by how little in relative dollars to their overall wealth can still be something that really irritates them. And so I just feel like at these times emotions are high, but we should stay focused on the businesses. And that was just my takeaway. I saw the Twitter action that morning after, and I thought, oh God, I mean, if GTI is one of our top companies in the industry in terms of their fundamentals and their focus on being really driving shareholder value, or not diluting shareholders, and financing the business with cash flow and prudent lending practices. If we're going to take them out back and shoot them on Twitter, like, what are we going to do with this industry? We have to acknowledge good work in hard times. And that's the way I'm feeling about it. So I've been trying to give accolades to people more than just being quiet about it, because I just think it's easy to be a critic, especially online. But I think we can all take a step back and look at, what these companies have achieved over this time frame and that they're going to keep achieving. So that's just my 2 cents on a bear market activity that I've been seeing.
Yeah, and I think it's so amplified because of the retail investor exposure in companies like GTI, because they're not, on the New York Stock Exchange or not on NASDAQ. And that's something we've talked about, and this industry's talked about, at length around like what's it going to take to get there. But because of that, it does seem to be like so much retail is holding a lot of these organizations up, because institutional's not there in the same ways it might be for like a Canadian operator that's on the New York Stock Exchange. And so I'm sure it just magnifies this frustration as well.
100%. And by the way, I have a ton of empathy around this, because my whole life is invested in this industry. I think we're all feeling the pain. And so I think it's understandable that people are getting upset. It's just hard. And then you and I were talking about it earlier. It's something I've been watching for months and months. Last year was that crazy meme stock fad that went on. I don't know what to call it. It was the meme stock time. And a lot of people, Wall Street bets, all of that, the AMC GameStop thing kicked it off. And then we saw in our industry Sundial and Tilray benefited from it. But people took, they accrued and took money off the table and got short-term capital gains. And the government reported that it's the highest amount of capital gains tax that they've seen paid in by individuals like this. And all I can think about is, with inflation, with the stock market reversing as heavily as it has on so many of these kind of golden children of the markets, I can only imagine how individual or quote unquote retail investors must be feeling. The pain must be very real. And I think it's going to be a difficult time to see it stabilize. And this is where institutional capital does come into play ordinarily, where they have more in the purse to work with, so to speak. It's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough times.
Yeah. And just, the broader markets in general, I feel like everything is being impacted. I saw today that Rivian, I think Ford and Amazon are both on lock now. And they can sell, and Ford sold like 8 million shares, pretty significant. Rivian dropped 50. And, that's not, it's institutional capital, I guess, in the sense of the scale that they have, and they're still pulling out of stuff like that. So it's not the end all be all answer, but I think it's just because we're all so invested in many ways into this industry and have just seen it kind of getting beat up so much. But yeah, it's hurt everywhere. So do you think this is going to be like the narrative, these GTI earnings? And we'll definitely do an earnings episode, hopefully with Matt again. He's so good at covering this stuff. And we've got Cureleaf coming up on the 9th, or today. And then we've got Ascend on the 11th, TrueLeaf on the 12th. Do you think it's going to be the story, just price compression at the same time inflation, and everyone's kind of getting squeezed? Or do you think it was a GTI specific?
Oh, no, I think it'll be across the board. And I think that's okay. We just have to see that it will stabilize as we unlock more growth, and hopefully as this inflationary period at some point starts to stabilize and we can get more people back to work and things start to balance out again. But yeah, I do think across the board on Q1, we'll see a bit of this in there. And yeah, it's interesting. Actually, as you pointed out on GTI, we just learned before the call that Joe Bairn, the CEO, is now moving in to run the consumer products group within Curaleaf. And now Matt Darren has been elevated to the CEO title and will be reporting to the board. So breaking news a bit here on the High Rise, although when this airs, it won't be breaking. But it was interesting to see that. Joe, as we know from having him on the podcast, has a deep background in consumer products. So it could be really interesting for him over into that in that division of Curaleaf.
Yeah, and Matt was on your panel at Benzinga, is that right?
He was.
Which I think is available online. I think they recorded all of that and on their YouTube and stuff. I haven't actually looked. Is it there?
What? You haven't watched my panel? Yes.
It's saved for later. No,
bookmarked. Yeah, it's on there, and it's interesting. We had an interesting, actually, relevant to this point. We had an interesting discussion about inflation and what may happen if we go into a recession and the impact on consumer trends. Maybe we'll do a podcast about that, talking about how, what has happened traditionally in recessions and what are recession resistant products and what are counter-cyclical products. Cannabis we do think that it is one of those, and it had shown that in 2020 when we thought we were having the Black Swan event, although this may be the Black Swan event. We thought COVID was the Black Swan event in March 2020. People were still buying cannabis. Remember unemployment went parabolic? I mean, people were still buying cannabis. So.
Oh, yeah, totally. And in 2008, 2009, I mean, that was alcohol, right? Sales went up, and there's similar parallels there. So this will be the test for cannabis here. We'll see what happens with these earnings. And then on the event side, this week, I'm going to be in Toronto at Lift & Co. there. I haven't been able to go to Canada because of the pandemic. So I'm excited to kind of get back there and kind of hear what's going on there. I know we talk about it from time to time, and it'll be interesting to connect with the operators. So looking forward to learning that. And you're going to be MJ Unpacked coming up?
MJ Unpacked in New York with a bunch of our portfolio companies. It is May 18th through the 20th.
Yeah, exciting. I'm looking forward to hearing about that one. And then I guess it's summer break after that. Not much on the event front.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Although we'll need to find a pool somewhere to do a poolside recording at some point.
It's summer. We can very handily find a pool. So let's do it.
Let's do it. Well, that'll do it for the High Rise this week. Thanks as always for tuning in. If you're enjoying the podcast, be sure you subscribe. It's really helpful. And we'll see you all next time.
Thanks for listening to the High Rise podcast, presented by Headset. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.